We'll just jump on to Cork against Westmeath. So that's going to be a Páirc Uí Chaoimh this weekend. Just to rehash the results that Westmeath have had so far, they had a heavy defeat to Galway the first day by 30 points. And then in their most recent outing, they pushed Waterford pretty close, 122 to 119. For Cork's part, they drew with Tipperary last weekend, 216 to 22. And then the first day out scored 5-22 against Waterford, who came in with 127. Now, obviously, the first thing I think of when I see this matchup is that a couple of years ago, Westmeath conceded 140 against Cork in a qualifier match. But, you know, even just after what happened last weekend, Westmeath putting up a very good showing against a much changed Waterford team, it must be said. Shane O'Neill, he said, I was keen that the lads would, Shane O'Brien, the manager of Westmeath, said, I was keen the lads would show what they're made of. And the way they fought for every single ball showed the spirit in the group. Many other teams might have gone down the blame game route, but during the week the spirit was high and our training was first class. Now this is a big test because I don't know if Cork will shuffle their deck, but if they don't, in a big pitch like Páirc Uí Chaoimh, this is a game that'll test Westmeath to the last.
Oh, big time. And like Cork's mentality is not going to change regardless of who they're playing. We saw with Laois, you know, many years ago, if they can hit 10 goals, they will hit 10 goals. I don't think, isn't it funny, you mentioned that 140, I don't think that's the same Cork team now. I think Kieran Kingston would be much happier if they hit 725 rather than 140 now. I think the idea of the handy point, or maybe not breaking the line and taking on your man and tipping the ball over the bar, is gone maybe from their mindset now. So they'll have not only green flags on their mind. So interesting to see how Westmeath set up. I know they played a sweeper, and at times they played two sweepers when they played them in that game in Cusack Park a couple of years ago. But like it is a daunting enough task for Westmeath, because, you know, when you're chasing shadows, when Cork are moving around like they were, particularly the first day out against Waterford, and to a lesser extent against Tipperary. And, you know, if you look at, you know, possession stats of how much percentages Cork have had the ball, they could have the ball, you know, 70 to 75% of the time, because they're going to hold on to it when they have it. So it'll be interesting to see what Westmeath do to try and curb them. But you would be a bit worried. The only thing I would say is, yeah, fairness to them, geez, they bounced back with a right good performance last week, and we're right in the game down to death, even if Waterford did lose a couple of players. And that's a good sign of where they're at, because it easily could have just went the other way, and it could have been another heavy defeat, and they'd nearly just writing off the whole league campaign, and they're just waiting for that kind of relegation clash just to stay up in Division 1. So in fairness to them, if they can keep within 10 or 15 of Cork at the weekend, I think they wouldn't be happy, but that'd be something. And not for their, you know, not to concede 3 or 4 early goals. If they do, you know, they could be in for a big hammering, but hopefully they'll keep it as tight as they can, and keep it, you know, the respectability that they brought against Waterford, and that kind of honest endeavour and keeping it real tight that they brought against Waterford. They're going to have to bring that this weekend again.
Yeah, I'm just looking back over the notes that I made after the Tipperary and Cork draw last weekend. You know, will we see more of that carrying ball, the hand pass? I'd imagine Westmeath will play with at least one man back. Maybe they'll just play with a single man up front, maybe just two up inside the 45 at different times when they don't have the ball. And how will Cork deal with that? Another thing that stands out to me here is, as I look at the early parts of the second half, so it was 12 points to Tipperary, 1-8 to Cork at half time. And Cork didn't score until the 44th minute then, and it was a goal. And after that, they scored a point from a free. So between half time and I think going all the way up to the 57th minute, they scored just 1-1 from play. Obviously a free in on top of it as well. But Tipperary were allowed to completely take over the game. Now Cork finished relatively strongly later on in that half, but they certainly didn't blow you away for 70 minutes. And that's the big question I have after watching them in Thurles the last day. I can see what Cork are trying to build, and I think there's a lot of promise to it. And then, you know, Robbie O'Flynn has to come back into the team. Seamus Harney didn't play. They have more options to come, Colm Spillane. But can this game plan work for 70 minutes? And as we're talking, it's absolutely spilling. God knows what sort of a weekend we'll get in terms of, you know, leading to flowing hurling. But what Cork are doing at the moment, it's a tough job to make that last for 70 minutes and be on the top of the ground, spraying the ball around and players interchanging and running off the shoulder.
It definitely is. It's fair demanding and energy sapping, in fairness, isn't it? And you're basically running the ball, essentially running the ball from one end of the pitch to the other. You see how difficult it is for football teams to do that unless you're high end of fitness. It's going to break down at times as well because they're only refining it. In many ways, they're only learning it at the moment, to be honest with you. So it's definitely going to break down at various stages, as you say. That second half, it definitely did break down. You'd be worried in the big cut and thrust of a big championship game, particularly a Munster semi-final against Limerick. If you have that 15 or 20 minute spell where you're struggling and maybe you don't get your hands on the ball and you don't get many shots away, that could be game over. So I I like what Cork are doing. I kind of already kind of have it in my head that this year could come a bit too soon to be maybe All Ireland contenders, but they're definitely, with the age profile of the team as well. Generally, they're playing a game that suits the players they have available. They're not, outside of Robert Downey, they're not, 6'4". They're all 6 foot-ish, about 13 stone, real mobile, quick players, all good ball players. Patrick Collins is an interesting one in goals as well. I think he had one long puck out the other day, probably because he had to. So it's going to be interesting to see, I don't know if Westmeath will be able to do it, but will teams start pressing them? You won't give Cork possession of the ball in a big championship game, I wouldn't think, because you're going to try and make them win it. So it'll be interesting to see how teams go at them in that kind of way. But they're definitely still learning on the job, and that game plan takes an awful lot of practice.
Yeah, so it's a big game for both teams in different ways. Westmeath will want to make sure they give a good account of themselves yet again and just very much consign that Galway performance to history.